play the music back through something else while we look at the Ableton session, which is pretty silly, but if it works, it works. Just let me find that file. Okay, there's one of them. Okay, so I'm going to share my sound one more time here, and let me know if you're hearing it. Okay, are you all hearing that?
Yep.
Okay, great.
Sounds great.
Okay, so the last thing I'm going to test is I'm going to see if I can share my screen while I'm doing that and see if it still sounds okay. So you can look at the Ableton session. It's kind of silly, but you can look at the Ableton session while I'm playing it through some completely different means here. Oh. Okay. So that seems to work okay, to my great relief here. Okay, so I think I am finally ready to begin. Yeah, so I don't know if you want to do any introductions or anything, but yeah, I'm all set. I'm all good to go now. Thanks for
honestly.
Thanks for that.
There are not that many people here, so we could have people introduce themselves if they wanted to.
Oh, okay. Well, I was just saying, should I introduce myself, or do you want to do that?
Why don't you start, and if anyone else wants to give short, say hello.
Okay.
I think that
an optional hello.
Yeah.
If people want to introduce themselves, sure. So my name is Isaac Shankler. My pronouns are they and them, and I'm a composer and accordionist and electronic music. I live in Los Angeles. It's very sunny right now. The air quality is thankfully okay. And I teach at Cal Poly Pomona, which is a little bit east of LA. I direct a concert series called People Inside Electronics that is basically on hiatus now for obvious reasons. What else? Yeah, that's about it. I make music for concerts and video games. If anyone else wants to introduce themselves, that'd be great too. Or I can just launch right into the presentation. Well, maybe I want to leave a little room for Q&A too, so maybe when people have questions at the end, they can introduce themselves. So when I was looking at people's responses about what they were most interested in, what they wanted to talk about, some people were interested in learning more about video game music. Some people were interested in learning more just like how to get started with electronic music. And some people wanted to learn about generative music. And so I was trying to think, oh man, those are all, well, they're all such great topics and they're all such big topics. But it turns out that I'm working on a project right now, kind of a work in progress, that does kind of intersect with all three. So I thought I would talk about that. Which doesn't happen to me all the time. Sometimes my experimental music world and my video game music world are very separate. But right now I'm involved with a project. I don't think I'm allowed to say what the project is, but I'm going to show you some of the things I've been working on for this project. So it's basically VR, a puzzle game in VR. And so the developer that I'm working with is interested in doing some more sometimes called dynamic audio, where the music is responding to things happening in the game. And even some generative music, which would be more music that would be more generated on the fly as opposed to kind of composed out in a linear way. So I'll talk a little bit about that process kind of from start to end. And it kind of starts in, it starts out in Ableton and composing a track in Ableton, and then it moves toward working with the generative stuff, which I've been doing in Pure Data, which maybe some of you know or know about. It's very similar to Max MSP in some ways. It's actually, in fact, actually originally developed by the same person, Miller Puckett, who helped develop Max MSP and then developed PD or Pure Data on his own as kind of an open source alternative to Max MSP. And I'll talk about why I'm using that particular thing for this project. But yeah, feel free to, I'll try and keep an eye on the, I'll try to keep an eye on the chat so that if you have questions in the process of this, let me know. So I'm just going to start by playing back this in progress track that that I've been working on. So this is kind of a sketch of what's going to be in the game. I don't think this is going to be the final version for a variety of reasons, but for one reason, because this is all very linear, what I have here, and when it's in the game, it's not going to be this linear. But I wanted to give the developer an idea of some of the sounds that and some of the aesthetic that I was thinking about for the game, and they gave me some kind of temp, not exactly a temp track, but some other tracks that were similar in feel, and they were all kind of electronic, like a little bit IDM-ish, including a couple Autechre tracks, if you know that group, that duo, which I was excited about that because I love Autechre, and so does the developer of this game. So I felt like we were on the same page about that. So I'm just going to play back the track, and I guess the only other thing to know about it is that there is kind of the developer wanted there to be kind of a change in tone at some point because of a particular kind of event that happens in the game. So kind of halfway through the track, there is kind of there's a shift that happens. I'm sure you'll hear it. So there we go. Apologies, this is completely the wrong file. This is not going to give you the full picture. Hold on 1 second. That's embarrassing. There it is. Okay. I found it. No worries. Okay, let's try that one more time. Try and start. It's roughly the same place. Okay, so there you have it. Thanks, everybody. Yeah, so this is kind of this isn't the very first iteration of it. So the sketch that I almost accidentally played back before. So originally I just had what was the first half of the tune. And here I'm going to risk trying to play through Ableton. Okay. So what it actually started with was this chord progression, this kind of tonally ambiguous kind of chord progression here. And I actually came upon that actually playing, I've been learning ukulele, and we have a baritone ukulele, which I recommend. It's actually, I think, for someone like me who has never played guitar and finds the guitar kind of overwhelming, the baritone ukulele is basically the top 4 strings of the guitar, which same exact tuning, same exact range, but it has a nice kind of mellow sound. So it's sort of like guitar on easy mode. So I found that a fun instrument to play around with lately. And so I came upon those chords and then just started arpeggiating those chords. And that's where this riff came from, this kind of what I sometimes think of as the, I think of the sound as like crystals. I don't totally know why. They feel like crystals or sound like crystals. Oh my gosh, Ableton really doesn't like what I'm doing right now. Okay, so I may not be able to do that. Wow, really? Just one solo instrument? Really, Ableton? Okay. So I may not be able to demonstrate it, but it's that, And then the other kind of nice thing about it, let me see the MIDI. The other thing I liked about it was that it sort of had a compound melody feel. The top line you could kind of hear as a melody. And that's also where the kind of time signature shifts that you hear kind of came from, is that, I don't know, sometimes I get into these, I don't know what to call them. They're not exactly rules, but sort of like oh, if I do this, then if I do this, then this other thing has to happen. This sort of kind of cascade of thoughts that leads you in a certain direction. So for this, it was, okay, well, if the top note changes, I have to reiterate the note that comes before immediately in the melody. But if the top note stays the same, then I shouldn't repeat that note before moving on to the next measure. So that's, so you start so that gave me starting out with a bar of 6, and then I think a bar of 5, and then a bar of 6, and then a bar of 5. And that changes very slightly in the second half of the tune because the melody changes slightly. So I think, I forget what it changes to. It might be 5 plus 6 plus 6 plus 5. Anyway, it changes in a subtle way that you might not even notice. But what I originally had was that, again, that first half of the tune that you heard, the developer was basically like, well, I like this, but I was really hoping for this mood. And also it's not enough. It's not enough for, not enough music for the levels in there. So that's where the second half of the tune came into being, where you have a much, even though much of the sonic elements and even what those elements are doing kind of remains the same, you're suddenly in this more tonally grounded place. And I ended up liking how that felt, and so did the developer, fortunately. Even though it wasn't exactly what the developer was looking for either, apparently. But they still liked it, so that was a relief. So obviously this isn't generative at all in its construction, or at least it's very linear from beginning to end. But there are ways to do kind of lightly generative things in Ableton, even in the what's called arrangement mode, which is the the more linear mode as opposed to session view in Ableton, which is more about triggering clips and triggering loops and stuff like that. And so the main way I like to use that is through MIDI effects. So as opposed to audio effects, which process audio and change audio, MIDI effects are something that change the MIDI that's coming in, whether it's from an external instrument or in these MIDI clips themselves. So that gives you an opportunity to change the MIDI even before it gets to the instrument, gets to the instrument playing. And you might wonder why you would want to do that. What would be the point of that? And in this context, I'm using it mostly with the drums. It's useful to sometimes add a sense of liveliness to the drums, as opposed to a more kind of mechanical or predictable feeling. So here, yeah, so these three, I believe these three instruments are the ones that are doing that here. And again, I'm going to take a chance. I'm going to see if Ableton will behave here. So I'm going to turn these off and let you hear what this hi-hat what this hi-hat thing is doing without any of those MIDI effects. So just like a really basic upbeat, nothing too fancy. But then, so there are two things happening here. One is that this is changing which drum it's hitting, which drum sound it's making. So it's randomly choosing, I think, one of 3 different drum sounds. So here's what that ends up sounding like. So some of the differences are subtle, but some of them are more noticeable, but you can tell how already it's a little bit less predictable. And then this is changing this is affecting the velocity randomly. And so this not only changes the volume, but often a lot of sample libraries will have different samples that play back depending on where you are in terms of velocity or what velocity is going back. So that's what this will put into it. So
hey Isaac, we're getting slightly broken up audio on our end.
Glitches.
Not from Ableton, just from your Zoom mic.
Yeah, I think again, I think it really doesn't like it when I'm running both at the same time. So I apologize for that. I'll try and turn off the sound when I'm speaking through it, which is what I'm doing up here in the upper right. I'm just turning the audio processing on and off. Thanks for letting me know. And then there's another sound here that I'm doing something similar with. That's on 16th notes instead of 8th notes. So here's what that sounds like without any MIDI effects. So, and then here's what that sounds like with the MIDI effects added. And then here's what it sounds like when you put those two together. And then with the rest of the drums here, yeah, with the kick here. Oh, now it really doesn't like that. So you just get a little more liveliness. You just get a little more kind of. Let me turn that audio off again. Glitch. Okay. So just a little more liveliness to it. And I'm trying to think if I do that on any other instruments. I think that's there's some tracks where I do it on more elements. I think with this one, it's just the same. I think it's just those in terms of Ableton. So then let's talk about how to make this dynamic into dynamic audio in the context of a game. So this is where PD comes in. This is where pure data comes in. And if I'm, let's see, is my mic working better now? Is my mic working okay now?
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. So hopefully PD, we won't have that same problem. But let's see here. Let's go through Zoom here. Okay. So the developer here wanted something where they could trigger these kinds of things independently on and off for various parts of the gameplay. So that's what we have here.
Isaac, I think we're not seeing a screen. We're still seeing Ableton.
Yep, I see that now. Let's try that. Can you see it now?
Yep.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so this is the kind of in-progress PD session for the game. So so the reason why I use PD for this is because there are some tools for actually integrating PD into game engines and other kind of programming contexts. There's a library called PDLib for that. And there's also something called Heavy, which can convert PD code into C++ code. I didn't do, fortunately, I don't have to do that myself. But the developer of this game was motivated to basically connect PD, get PD to work in the context of this engine. And as of right now, it's working. It's working great. So so basically what they wanted is connectors that could, where they could kind of hook into this PD patch and send data to PD that would trigger things, and then also get the audio out. So if you look at these R space bass up play, R space bass down play, anything that starts with an R is a receive object. So that's where we would get information from the game engine. And then anything that starts with send tilde is going to send audio out. And I don't even know if they're using the sends. They might just be using the DAC or the digital audio converter. But I decided to give them sends just in case they wanted to, like, one of the things that I'd like to do, that we're planning to do, is to have different sounds attached to different objects in the game, which is a common thing to do in a game engine. So for example, you could have sounds that were attached to the player character or sounds attached to different objects in the game, which you can do with these individual sends instead of just having it put out generic stereo audio, which is what this is doing here. Okay, so to turn this on, we'll turn audio on. We'll start the metronome and trigger some sounds. Are you all hearing the drums there?
No, I'm not getting anything.
Nothing. Let me try this one more time. Oh, I didn't save these changes. That's probably why. There we go. How about now? No, I'm not hearing anything. This is very interesting. Let me try one more thing. Let me just try streaming the desktop instead of individual desktop. Oh, I know why. No, I thought I knew why. Oh dear. Oh gosh. I wonder if it doesn't like my audio settings. Suffer something. Oh, I know why. Okay, let me try one other thing. So this is what I should have tested beforehand. There we go. Are you hearing it now? Okay, wonderful. Okay. So there's the kick. There's those other little drums. Pads. The pads might take a second to trigger. It's waiting for the beginning of the loop. There we go. And the crystals. So you can hear that this is, it's not exactly the track that we just listened, but it's very, very close. I think there's one other kind of delayed crystal sound that's not in there, but it's very, very close. So this allows them to trigger these things, some of them immediately, and some of them take a little while to kick in. And then these sounds, maybe the most kind of dynamic or interactive aspect of it right now. So there's also the ability to play the bass. So that the game can actually trigger these sounds on the fly, and they're still quantized to the beat. But you can hear that it could happen in any part of the measure. So my original concept was that this would be a sound that would make when the player character would jump and land. And it's currently being used for something else that I didn't imagine it for, but it's being used in that context. So so this is kind of the, and there'll be a few more kind of dynamic elements like that in the final version of the track, as well as I haven't gotten around to the second half of the track here yet. So this is, yes, 22.67.857. It's kind of a absurd tempo, but yeah, it's the value of an eighth note in whatever tempo this is. I think quarter note equals 112. So that's why I kind of have that absurd, yeah, or 224 if you were to double it, yeah. Yeah, that's why I find it funny when people get into like arguments about like, you know, because I know that there's those like really standard tempos, you know, especially in the context of classical music. And so like 112 is okay, 120 is okay, but 115, no, never, you know. But if you're dealing in this world, you end up dealing with really, sometimes really absurd numbers, no matter what tempo you're at. Yeah, people get really upset about those. Yeah, so so this is the point where I think this could branch off in a lot of different directions, you know, depending on what people are interested in. I could dive into this PD patch a little more and actually talk about the kind of nuts and bolts of this PD patch and how it's working. Or I could talk a little bit more Ableton, talk about a little more about the composition side of things. What are people most interested in talking about at this point? What game parameters are mapped to the PD patch? Yeah, that's true, technically. 63 is legit. I don't know why 63 snuck through there. Let's see. Well, yeah, I can talk a little bit about those parameters. I took some notes here, which you can read. These are just kind of notes as I was speaking with the developer. So this game is kind of structured in several kind of short levels. So the levels, I think, at least at the beginning, aren't long enough to really warrant a complete piece of music. But we still wanted it to have, this kind of arc to it. So basically, each time you start a level, you kind of start from scratch and are kind of like building up elements kind of one at a time. And so what those map onto changes for a different level, but something might happen and then the crystal sound might activate, or something might happen and you suddenly get the more kind of complicated drums. And one thing that I'm in the process of doing that developers asked for is the ability to do that. So one thing that's not in here yet, for example, if I turn this on, turn some drum pattern on. So the crystal riff pattern is basically just starting wherever it is in the loop. It's probably more clear if I play the pads there. So one thing that they've asked for that I've yet to implement is the ability to do that, to basically quantize that to the bar instead of quantizing it to the beat, so that it sounds more natural. Because you can hear sometimes it makes a lot of sense when the crystals come in, and then sometimes it feels kind of arbitrary. So that's something I'm going to put in a future version. So to talk a little bit about how this is triggered here, or how this works. So there is a 44-note loop, and you can see where it is in the loop if you look at this number box that I just moved out of the way here. So I kind of pull out this part. I'm just going to copy and paste this so you can kind of see what's going on here. So this is the way to increment in PD, where you have this I object stores an integer, so it stores a number, and then it's connected to this addition object that just adds 1, and it's connected in this funky way where it's kind of connected in a loop where the output is going in here, so it's n, and then it's adding 1 to it, and then it's going back into the input there, the right input there. And the reason why that's important is that this right inlet is what's sometimes called a cold inlet. So this is just storing the value without sending the value on. And then this, this left inlet, which we can call a hot inlet, we're sending that message, kind of message that's just called a bang. And all a bang is just a message that means do the thing that this object is supposed to do. And both PD and MaxNSP use this concept. So that means when I say do the thing, it outputs the number and then adds a number and then adds a number and then adds a number each time I click this button. So if I hook that up to a metronome like I've done here, that means every beat, or every eighth note in this case, we get to a new number. Now you think, well, how do I get this to stop? Because this can go up forever and ever and ever and ever. So that's where, well, I'm doing this in a slightly different way here, but one way to do it is to wait for a particular number. So let's say I had, a loop that was 32 notes long. I could create an object called cell for select cell 32. And what that means is that will send a bang when I get to the number 32. Let's see if I can do this manually. There we go. So yeah, whoops. So the other thing I need to do is I need to give this a message to reset to 0. So I'm going to do that with a different kind of object, so a message instead of an object. So an object is kind of like a function in programming. It's a thing that does a thing, and a message is just a message. A message is just a little bit of data. So I'm going to put 0 in there, and I'm going to attach that to the right inlet there. And so if I lock the patch and then click 0, then I'll go back to the beginning. And then if I click this a bunch, when I get to 32, boom. So all I'm going to do at the end of this is to have it trigger. This is where things start to look kind of gnarly in PD. I'm going to have it trigger that 0 message when it gets to the end of the loop, so it'll start over. So if I did this right, it should start over after 32, and it does. Actually, if I want it to be 32 beats, I should have it go back to 1, or make this reset on 31. If you want to get super technical about it, but so that's a basic idea, and so this is a little fussy and intricate, but the nice thing about this is once you've done it, you basically have the kind of core, the basic core of what you can think of as, a really basic kind of sequencer, where you can have any sort of repeating pattern that you can add and subtract layers to, like we do here. So here I'm actually doing this in a slightly different way by storing a list of values and then going back to 0 when it gets to the end of a list. But that's the same basic idea. Does anyone have any questions at this point? Yeah. So there's lots of different ways to do this in PD and Max, some of which are more complicated than others. Go ahead.
I haven't seen Spigot before. Does it exist in Max too?
So Spigot, so this is one of those few things where, so a lot of these objects are very familiar if you use Max, like R and Metro and Cell and Load Bang. Those will be familiar if you use Max. Spigot is something, it's confusing because I think Max does have a Spigot, but it has to do with video. In PD, Spigot is does basically what gate does in Max. You can think of it as a fountain or a faucet, that kind of spigot where, okay, let the data pass through versus, okay, stop the data coming through. So that's essentially what's happening here. That's what allows me to kind of turn these things on and off, where it's basically like gate in MaxMSP, but the two inputs are reversed. So the left inlet is the one that receives the data, and then the right inlet is the one that lets it through or not. So basically, these are just toggles that say, let the data through, don't let the data through, let the data through, don't let the data through. Does that answer your question? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so in MaxMSP, I would probably use counter. Yeah, and counter, basically this was the result of me trying to duplicate counter in PD and trying to do it with as few objects as possible. And these are just these PD blank whatever. These are just subpatches. And tab play is basically something that plays a sample. So there are, so if you use MaxMSP, you might be familiar with buffers as things that store samples. In PD, everything is stored in arrays, and they're loaded with an object called sound filer. So this stores all these samples into an array. So here's some of those arrays look like. Yeah. So you can see what all those samples are. The one cool thing about doing this in like a dynamic or generative way, as opposed to just having like a linear MP3 or Ogg Vorbis file playback, is that it actually does turn out, I didn't know if it was going to or not, but it actually turns out that this is more space efficient than in it, having the entire audio file, because you only have these little snippets of audio file that you're able to trigger repeatedly. So here's some of the drum arrays. So for the drum stuff, to kind of simulate the kind of randomness that I did with the MIDI effects here, I just bounced. So the most tedious part about this was that I had to bounce all these individual samples. And you can kind of see that at the end. If I go to the end of the audio file, I made all these, I just dragged all the different parts of the track into their own kinds of zones so that I could bounce them individually. So that was maybe the part that was the most kind of tedious, is that I had to export each little bit of audio individually. If anyone knows like a way to batch do that in Ableton, let me know, because that's one of the more tedious parts of this process. So you can see in the drum player, this is really simple here. It's just triggering a random one every every time the metronome happens. And then I kind of cheated here because I realized kind of after the fact, I didn't plan ahead. I should have planned ahead better, and didn't realize until I was kind of partway through this patch, like, oh shoot, I thought all I needed were eighth notes, but some of the drums are actually happening on 16th note parts of the beat. So I kind of cheated here. This is kind of a hacky workaround that I might change eventually. But right now, it's just delaying the signal by a 16th note and triggering another random drum sound. I don't like to use delays in this way because sometimes sometimes it's prone to either like feedback or things continue on for longer than you want them to. It's kind of unpredictable sometimes because once you trigger a delay, who knows how long it will wait for that thing to happen. But because this was just such a short delay, I figured I was safe this time. And so having that whole kind of sequencer thing set up as a loop allows you to trigger things at different parts of the beat or different parts of the loop. So for the bass pattern, I have those two samples, the one the sort of bump and the bottom, which are the down and the up here. And I'm just able to trigger them at specific parts of that loop. So that's what this select object is doing. Select 2, 12, 24, 36. With the caveat that it also has to follow the chord changes. So that's what these Moses objects are doing here. So Moses is the equivalent of what split would be in MaxMSP. It basically functions kind of like a bunch of if-else statements, where it's saying, okay, if you're in the first part of the loop, play this chord. If you're in the second part of the loop, play this chord. If you're in the third part of the loop, play this chord. And in the fourth, play this chord. And that is also active. Let's see. So some of these are more complicated than others. For example, the kick is really simple because the kick doesn't change. The crystals are also pretty simple. So these are just the note names and it's triggering the notes. And this is the sequence of the note names here. So it's just cycling through this list kind of over and over again. And the X's there are where we have rests. As you can see here, it's listening for these different values here, but X is not on that list. So if I send it an X, it's not going to play back anything. So basically, it's a rest. I could have actually put any symbol there that isn't one of the accepted symbols, but I just figured X was something something that I could easily tell was a rest at a glance. So that's that part of the patch. Let me see. Any other questions? Yeah, Moses, exactly. Moses parts the incoming signals. Yes. Yes. It's one of those more punny object names.
I'm curious, Isaac, I haven't used Pure Data before. Is there any reason to use Pure Data over Max? Is there anything specifically unique to PD?
So there are a couple reasons. One is that PD is open source and free, which is a reason why a lot of people prefer it. The other reason also has to do with the fact that it's open source and that it's incorporated into, it can be incorporated into a game engine in a way that MaxMSP can't, because Max is a piece of commercial software. You can create apps in MaxMSP. Like there are, I think, apps on the Mac App Store that have been made in Max. As long as you can get those. I'm talking about on the Mac. I'm not sure what the process is for on PCs. I think it's probably simpler on PC. On Mac, you have to go through these increasingly elaborate kind of certification rituals and pay Apple money to be an Apple developer. But in the context of, but with Max, you can't integrate it into something else easily. You can't integrate it into another programming language or a game engine very easily. Whereas PD, lots of people have done it. There are tools that people have made to do it. I mentioned two of them. I can kind of dig up links on those. PDLib and Heavy are kind of the two that are the most used. Heavy is had kind of an interesting story. It was kind of like a startup where they wanted to make it easier for people to integrate PD stuff into games. But I think it was the kind of subset of people who were interested in both PD and game audio is still relatively small. So it never really took off. So they kind of folded, but they did basically open source everything that they had created when the company folded. So it's still out there, though it's no longer, it's no longer supported by any company, but it still exists. Yeah, and PD also runs on Linux. You can run it on like a Raspberry Pi. And there are actually commercial devices that PD runs on. Two of which I can think of are a little synth called the Organelle, which is made by a company called Critter and Guittari. How do you spell Guittari? I might be spelling it wrong. Whoops, I meant to send that to everybody. So Organelle is like a little synth that has PD actually running on it and a little USB flash drive in it. So you can actually kind of create your own patches for that little synth. Another thing that uses PD is a microcontroller called Bela, B-E-L-A, after Bela Bartok. So it's like a little device that you can use to make a little hardware electronic things. So there's a person named, there's an artist named Helen Lay. I don't know if it's Helen Lay or Helen Lee. Probably Helen Lee, actually, now that I think about it. Who makes these kinds of sound sculptures. And she uses Bela for the microcontroller for those devices, for those pieces. She has a really cool, like, I forget what she calls it. It's sort of like, looks like a huggable worm, but it's a musical instrument that she created recently. That I was kind of entertained by. Yeah, let me see if I can dig links up on some of these things. PDLib. Probably the most useful. Well, I'll dig up some links on it because I'm getting a lot of garbage for PDLib. And then Heavy. Oh yeah! Wow, here's something that includes all four, but it's a forum link. So the company that made Heavy is called Enzian Audio. So yeah, I'll compile some links on this stuff and send it to all of you in case you're interested. But yeah, does anyone else have any questions?
You'll have 2 more chances.
2 more chances. That's true. I do have 2 more chances.
Not everybody will have 2 more chances for questions.
Right.
Not
Okay,
to
well,
discourage right now.
yeah, that's true. Hold on, I'm hunting down the huggable worm. So let me see the huggable worm.
I was going to head out, but I'll wait for the huggable worm to arrive.
Important.
Let's see here. I thought it was recent, but maybe it's longer ago than I realized it was. Well, I found there's a picture of it. There's a picture of it on her pin tweet, which you can see here. But it's especially cool to kind of see in action. So I'll dig that up too and post that. Send that to Shoshana and Peter to share with you all. Yeah, that's all for today. So maybe I'll check in with Peter and Shoshana after maybe talking to you about